Hello and welcome to the BYU Family History Library webinar series. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Olive Espin and I'll be your host for today. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You are welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments, insights, and questions. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar is on August 6th with James Tanner. He will be giving a presentation entitled Researching Your Native American Ancestors. If you would like access to a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from Sara Cochran, who will be talking about locating records and archives from your couch. Before we begin, here's a little bit about our speaker. Sara is a full-time professional genealogist with over 28 years of research experience. Her research has taken her into nearly every state in the USA and Ireland, Italy, Austria, and Britain. She especially enjoys breaking down brick walls for her clients, discovering the stories of Black sheep ancestors, and helping individuals preserve their photographic legacy. Sara holds a Boston University Genealogical Research Certificate, a bachelor's degree in library science, and is an alumnus of the Pro-Gen Study Group. She is a member of multiple lineage societies, the Association of Professional Genealogists, and the Genealogical Speakers Guild. She also volunteers at the National Archives Riverside office. You can find her online at theskeletonwhisperer.com. If Sara is ready, we will turn the time over to her.
Thank you so much, Olive. Yes, let me get my screen sharing going here. And just a quick disclaimer, I think I need to update my bio with you guys. I have thoroughly enjoyed volunteering with National Archives, but I'm not doing that at present. So, although I do go visit them fairly often to do research. All right, because they have lots of stuff that's not online. All right, we good?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So a couple of quick housekeeping items. This is, of course, being recorded, so you'll be able to watch it again later and catch anything you missed. So I do ask that there be no other photography or recording during the presentation. We have slide numbers on the bottom right of each corner of each slide. So if you need one, you need to like swing back to one. You can include that in your question, and we can do that. All right, so dive right in. You know, we live today, it's 2025, it feels like it's the golden age of genealogy. Long gone are the days of hunched backs from bending over heavy ledger books we can't lift, strained eyes from hours at the microfilm reader, and buying extra boxes of tissues before hitting the dusty courthouse basement. And those mountains of photocopies or hand cramps from transcribing records that we can't copy, thing of the past. You know, today we get to sit at home in our favorite chair, a snack and beverage at hand, and research our ancestors from our laptop or tablet and download images straight to our computer. Indexing and optical character recognition and the new full text feature from FamilySearch, it all makes ancestor finding in records like newspapers, wills, and censuses a breeze. I mean, researching our family trees has never been easier, especially now that it's all online, right? Wrong. I kind of gave you a spoiler in the intro, didn't I? Let's talk about some of the myths of doing genealogical research in the 21st century and why they exist. And the first big one, of course, is that it is already all online. And, well, why do people think this? I mean, let's look at some numbers here. Ancestry spouts that they have over 60 billion records at their website. MyHeritage, over 20 billion. And in the 2023 end-year review, FamilySearch is up to over 18 billion, and they are adding more every single day. As of 2020, Find My Past states 2 billion records. I know it's way more than that now. And more than half of what they have on their website is from the British Isles. Now, I'm going to save you the math. That's over 100 billion records at just 4 websites. Yeah. And state and federal archives are digitizing records. There's websites dedicated to digitizing Specific record types, just newspapers or just yearbooks. And many private and organizational records are going online as well. I would not be surprised at all to learn that those resources combined match or exceed the number of records available to us on these 4 sites. So there's a lot of records available to us online. And especially for those who got started researching in the digital age, it's really tough to think that there might be even more out there. But this is a tip of the iceberg. Now, when I first created this presentation, it's gone through a few versions over the years. Back in 2019, these 4 websites had 44 billion records. Now it's over 100 billion. There's lots more to be digitized, and it's being done, but it's not all online yet. So myth number 2. Well, if it's not online, it doesn't exist. Now, you guys are smarter than that. I'm sure none of you have said that, but I've seen it out there in especially social media land. Why doesn't this person have a birth certificate? I checked Ancestry, it's not there. All right, it's not true. But like I said, I see it. And there's really, I can understand it. With so much online, you think it's got to be somewhere. But we've got lots of genealogists out there that have done all their research online, and they just haven't had the opportunity yet to be exposed to those microfilms and dusty courthouse basements. Myth number 3. Okay, well, if it does exist, it'll be online eventually. I think there's 2 big reasons for this one. One, we really want everything to be online, right? I want everything to be online. I would love to be able to do all my research in 2 a.m. in my bunny slippers, sure. And considering the speed at which records are being digitized and put online, I don't blame anyone for thinking that this is possible. But I think there's also a lack of understanding of just how much there is left to be digitized. I mean, the reality is that there are probably trillions and trillions of pages of genealogically relevant records out there in the wild, in archives, libraries, institutions, private collections, local and federal government agencies worldwide. What's online currently barely scratches the surface, and it's taking decades to get us to this point. So we got to bust this myth as well. And there's a lot of records that will probably never be digitized and made online, or might be, but not in our own lifetimes. Why? Well, we have supply and demand. It's an issue. I'll give you an example. There's a collection of letters currently held as part of the special collections at the Tomas Riviera Library at UCR Riverside here in California, which were written in the early 1800s by a woman named Anne Harris, who lived in England at the time, and she was writing to her sweetheart, Richard, who also lived in England. Now, there's no evidence that Anne and Richard ever married or had children together. Married each other. I'm pretty sure Richard married. But Anne mentions her siblings in these letters and talks about the families that she works for. Descendants of those families might be really interested in this collection of letters. But how often do you think it gets requested by a patron? Probably not very often. Libraries and archives have limited budgets, so they've got to prioritize what they can digitize. On the other hand, the Tomas Riviera Library also has an extensive collection of materials about the Tuskegee Airmen. These records are likely to be requested often, so it would be worth the time and money for the archive to digitize them, ensuring access to patrons while also limiting the handling of these records, helping to preserve them for the future. Fragility of the records factors in too. The records from the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812, including pension and bounty land files, have taken priority over records from the Civil War or early 1900s, because these records are both in high demand from researchers and they're in worse physical condition, which isn't to say that the archives aren't caring for them properly. They're doing everything they can to ensure these records are preserved for as long as possible, but, records are 250 years old. Aging can be a little rough. Sometimes it's the law that determines if or when records can be digitized and placed online. The 1960 federal census, it exists, but because of the law, we aren't going to be able to view it until 2032. The laws in the state of Wisconsin prohibit the copying or publishing certain types of records in any print or electronic formation. The Vital Records Office even has a little stamp they put on the record that says basically don't digitize this and put it online. And I'd have a picture of it for you, but So didn't want to get in trouble. Privacy concerns and identity theft are another reason that many records won't be digitized in the near future. The first Social Security numbers were issued in November of 1935, meaning that most individuals alive today, at least in the United States, have one. Even though these numbers were never intended to become an identifier, that's what happened. Now, the solution is easy enough, in at least practical terms, and just redact all the Social Security numbers. We don't have anything to worry about. Except that adds to the cost of digitization. So it's one of those balancing acts, even though probably not a lot of people are stealing identities by getting a vital record from the county courthouse. Just a hunch. I think there's probably easier ways to do it. But like I said, there's a cost to digitizing. And all of these institutions are on budgets. So priority is going to generally be given to collections that are frequently accessed, especially if they're in delicate condition. I'll give you an example. So when I was volunteering at the National Archives Riverside, one of my projects was to remove all of the staples and fasteners from a collection of Chinese Exclusion Act case files, because these genealogically rich and historically important documents were about to be digitized. And to digitize, you got to take all the fasteners out. I was given 9 5-inch boxes to work on. That was my project, to get through that chunk of it. And there's lots more boxes than that. And it took me about 4 hours to do half a box. There's a lot of fasteners in these records. So at that rate, it would have taken me about 2 business weeks to process that entire section that I was given. Now, I was volunteering, so they're not paying me a salary, which is a big cost savings. But there's other costs. There's, the building itself, the air conditioner. If I were an employee, there would be my salary plus things like employee benefits, all that stuff. Plus the hundreds of hours it's going to take to scan all of those documents. It's expensive. Worth it, but expensive. So now we know the ugly, painful truth. If we want to do thorough research to reconstruct the stories of our forebears, we are not done yet with those dusty basements, strained eyes at the microfilm readers, or contacting courthouses and libraries across the world for help. So how do we track down and access records that will be valuable for us without leaving the comfort of our own homes? Well, we have some challenges to acknowledge. All right, first of all, our ancestors didn't stay in one place. Even the ones who were born, raised, and died on a single plot of land didn't always stay in the same place. I got people who switched counties without moving so much as a spoon. It's not uncommon to discover that the government borders change around them, right? It's also possible that our ancestors did their business in neighboring counties if that courthouse was just easier to get to. And the records didn't stay in one place either. Now, this is often true of records transferred from a county level to, say, a state archive, but it's also true of unpublished manuscripts, a category of records that includes items like family Bibles or personal letters, like that collection that I mentioned about 2 sweethearts in England somehow ended up in Riverside, California. Records move. And we tend to miss out on information about our families by not fully exploring that fan club, the term coined by Elizabeth Shown Mills, reminding us that our friends, family, and associates and neighbors who interact with our people may be very important. Excuse me, friends and extended family. So how do we increase our odds at finding records that are going to help us, no matter where they are? Well, first, we need a question, right? We always start our research with a question. So what questions do you have about the person you're researching? I want to know everything about great-great-grandpa James Jackson. Might be a goal, but it's not a question. A more focused question, such as who are the parents, right? If James R. Jackson, born in Livingston County, Kentucky in 1852, will help guide us towards records likely to help us learn what we want to know. Then we make a list of what records might have answers to that question, right? Taking my question for James as an example, who are his parents, I want a death record or an obituary, maybe a marriage record. I should also look for the marriage records, death records, and obituaries of any siblings he might have had. But other records could be very helpful. Possibilities include, but are most certainly not limited to, things like land records. He could have purchased or inherited land from his father, wills and probates to see if he shows up, or the Civil War pensions of potential fathers, widows' pensions of potential mothers. James, if he was born in 1852, his father might have been an appropriate age to have served in the war. And we want to keep our eyes peeled for things like diaries and letters written by members of those fan clubs. All right, so we need to think about those fan club members and who might have created records that could be helpful for us. Remember to pay attention to where those people might have lived, since they may not have lived in the same community your ancestor did for their whole lives. My third great-grandfather, John Streeter, was in the Civil War. He was taken prisoner at the Battle of Buzzard's Roost and subsequently imprisoned at Andersonville prison camp. He died there, and his widow filed for widow's pension. There are affidavits in her application from other men who had served with John saying, yes, I served with this man. Yes, he was captured. Yes, I was at Andersonville with this man. They may not have known each other before the war, but so I want to pay attention to any records they might have left after the war that might mention John. And in fact, one of those men who gave an affidavit not only has his own pension, which gave me a lot of insight into the types of medical issues that my John might have suffered had he survived, but turns up he was out here. There's records about this fan of my guy here in Riverside. Things just show up in interesting places. And make a list of the time frame these records would have been created. And we really need to remind ourselves to pay attention to those county boundaries. One of my favorite reference books for doing this is the Federal Map Guide to the U.S. Census by Thorndale and Dollarhide. It was published in 1987, but it's still very relevant. It shows the boundaries of U.S. states and territories county by county as they shift and change over time from 1790 to 1920. And you can kind of see how things are moving around and realize, maybe my person isn't there anymore because that county changed names. So the first thing we want to do is look at what we already have, right? We're going to look at our home sources. Sometimes the answer that we're looking for, or a big clue towards the answer that we're looking for, is already in our files and it's right under our noses. I kept getting ancestry hints for this fellow, indicating that he was in the US Navy during World War II. Now, Timothy was born in 1899, so I kind of didn't give a lot of credence to the hints. I'm like, he was a little too old for that. Then one day I was reading through some letters written by his sister Patricia to their sister Margaret, and she provided Timothy's new military mailing address, confirming, in fact, that Timothy was in the Navy. Timothy's naval service file led me to his railroad pension file, which included a widow's pension application that gave me all kinds of answers to questions we had about whether or not he was married, who that wife was, and whether or not they had any children. None of those records, the letter, the service file, or the pension file, were online. None of them are online now that I know of. Once you've gone through what you have about your person, and this can include family papers as well as research you've already done, but after you've got that, time to reach out to your family. So parents, siblings, cousins, extended cousins, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews. See if anyone in the family has stories that they were told that they would be willing to share, or maybe they have a stash of old letters and records they'd be willing to help you with. Best part, thanks to email and social media outlets like Facebook, you can do this from your couch. And with Zoom, you can have a little interview and chat over Zoom too. And remember, you've got all those DNA matches. You might have met a cousin that's got some really good information about your shared line right there. Once you've exhausted home sources and family collections, it's time to look for what other people have about your family. We do this with a literature study. Now, records do travel just as people did. We want to start with the areas your ancestors and their fan club members are known to have lived in. And if you'll pardon the pun, branch out from there. We want to start with organizations such as the state archives. Many of them have catalogs of their holdings on their website. County courthouses and recorders' offices for things like probate and land records. Historical and genealogical societies. One of the local genealogy societies in my area actually has court books at their little society library at the public library. And they're like traffic violations from the 20s and 30s, which is fun, but they're not at the courthouse, they're at the library in the genealogy society section. Facebook and other social media groups, occupational archives, church records, lineage society records, public and university libraries, and museums. Now, especially with museums, we think, oh, they're just going to have artifacts, they're just going to have stuff. Yes, they have a lot of stuff, but they often have paperwork that came in with the stuff, or they have a little research library of their own. How do we find these places? Well, Google can be our friend, or your whichever search engine you like best. So I put in Irving, Texas. I was working on a project, and genealogy. So place name plus genealogy. And I got some interesting results. The very first one was the Irving Public Library local history and genealogy section. Awesome. And then there's the Dallas Genealogy Society down here. I bet there's some nice folks there, and I bet that they have a better idea than I do about what might be available locally, even if they specifically don't have the art records, where they could put their hands on them. They can probably tell me where to go to find what I'm looking for. When I did this for my local area, I got the link to the FamilySearch Wiki page, the Genealogical Society of Riverside, and because we have the National Archives in our backyards, the link for NARA. Now, there's also a lot of online resources that kind of serve as hubs, where you can look for through many repositories for potential record sets all at once, or listing online and offline resources on a single website. We'll look at a few of those, and along the way, I'll give you some hints and pointers as you work in the search engines of these websites and others in their handout. So you might already know about Cindy's List. If you haven't spent any time exploring this website, you now have homework. Cindy Engel, the creator of Cindy's List, searches the internet for genealogically relevant records online and offline and adds them through with links to the appropriate subject categories. Now you can just browse the categories by clicking on this button, which takes you to this page where you can further refine your search. If you're looking for several kinds of records for a specific location, you can use the search button up at the top of the page. That's just going to search within this website, not the whole internet. So here's an example of that. So you've got lots of different places and things coming up. Let's talk about search terms. We've got to search a little differently than we've all gotten used to since the golden age of genealogy brought us indexes and optical character recognition, making it easy to search for our ancestors just by name. All right, I know I'm not going to be able to see you, but raise your hand if you remember the old search strategy for the card catalogs. We don't know the author or title of the book we want. What do? We search by subject, right? So I'm going to look by subject in order to find volumes that could potentially hold information that we want. And then we pulled those volumes off the shelf and looked through them and maybe even read some of them to find what we were looking for. We've got to go back to this method of searching. Subject searching and its more modern companion keyword searching are critical to our success. So what's the difference between these two anyway? So subject searching uses the subject headings which were added to the catalog entry when the listing was created. These subject headings come from a predetermined list of possible terms. As a result, it's important to enter the subject search terms in the order the cataloger used them. If you don't know what the exact subject headings the cataloger used, or you want more flexibility, then we want keywords, because keywords search the entire catalog entry, or in some cases, the entire record. Now, the disadvantage of that is sometimes you get way more results than are useful. But you can refine your results by adding additional keywords or specifying that you want matches that only include all of the terms, or the terms have to be close proximity to each other. You want the phrase Abraham Lincoln, not just Abraham and Lincoln, somewhere in the document. The database at ArchiveGrid includes over 5 million records for over 1,000 archival institutions worldwide, allowing you to locate holdings in participating archives right from your own couch. This is actually part of WorldCat, a website you might already be familiar with and use to locate books in libraries across the world. Returning to Archive Grid, there are two ways to search the database. One, we can look for an archive near a specific location, especially handy if you're planning a research trip and you want to see what archives might be near your destination and browse their collections. I did a search for archives near Riverside, California, and as you can see, one of the participating archives is the California State Polytechnic University in Pomona. If you'd like to browse their holdings in more detail, I can click on that green search the catalog, or I can just hit the contact information to reach out to them. I went ahead and searched the collection. They have 76 different collections in here. For fun, I had done a search for letters, and I found this collection of World War II letters written during and immediately following World War II by students of Western Kentucky University. So these are students from Western Kentucky University who had gone to World War II into the European theater, wrote back to their various faculty members, and then the collection of letters ended up at Cal State Poly Pomona in California. Records travel. The other way to search the records at Archive Grid is by subject or keyword. If you have ancestors who lived in the United States during the mid to late 1800s and early 1900s and were of Chinese descent, they were affected by the Chinese Exclusion Act. If you just type their name into this website search engine, you're probably not going to find anything because archival collections rarely include a searchable name index. But the term Chinese exclusion yielded over 300 collections. And you might be really interested in this one from UC Berkeley, Chinese in California, circa 1851 to 1963. If you click on the contact information button, you are sent to the Berkeley Library homepage, and check this out. They have an Ask Us, they have an Ask a Librarian feature. More on that later. Now, I'd be really remiss if I didn't highlight the FamilySearch Wiki today. If you haven't played with the wiki yet, you've got some more homework. You're gonna love the wiki. Volunteers and staff have assembled miniature locality guides for places all over the globe, and you can access this for free, even if you don't have a FamilySearch account. After my US map guide, this is my favorite place to learn about a new to me research location in a hurry. When you go into the wiki, you're going to come to this screen and there's a big search box and you can put in a place, you can put in a topic. For fun, let's see what we get when we get Clay County, South Dakota. Lots of information. So here's the beginning of this popped open. We've got the county courthouse. We have a direct link to the county courthouse. We have some contact information and a little bit of information about what records they have. Register of Deeds has birth and deaths from 1905, etc. And there's a little table of known beginning dates for government county records. There's also, if there's record loss, it'll talk to you a little bit about that. This can help us understand why we might be having trouble locating records, whether that's due to a boundary change, record loss, or the records just weren't being created yet. If you're researching someone who was born in 1900 in Clay County, South Dakota, this table tells you right off the bat that there's not going to be a governmental level birth record. So you're going to have to look at alternate sources, like church records or newspaper articles. And then there's lots of good information. FamilySearch links collections, both within their own website and on external websites such as Ancestry or Genealogy Bank. And it'll warn you with a little $sign if it's a subscription website. Now, this isn't a comprehensive list of every single resource that is available out there in the internet and in the world for Clay County, but it's a really great start. Let's move on to the last website we'll talk about that will help us locate records housed in various locations across the nation. Chronicling America. This is hosted by the Library of Congress and it is free to the public. There's two sections of the website. The first is the collection of digitized newspapers, which runs from 1789 to about 1963. This is regularly changing. And then there are the U.S. newspaper directory records. This is the part we're going to explore. It's a catalog of U.S. newspapers published from 1690 to the current day. Clicking on the directory brings you to this screen. So you can browse by title if you know what the title is. You can search by location, state, county, or city. And you can just put in the state and the county and leave the city blank if you want to. You can add in dates. The dates are in 10-year increments, and I'll show you how that affects your search results. Keywords, if you have some. You can also search by frequency. How often was the paper published? What language was the paper published in? If you're researching German immigrants to Pennsylvania, you might want to put in German and look for Pennsylvania papers published in German. Then there's the ethnicity press. So maybe a newspaper that was published by Germans for Germans, but actually wasn't in German. We also get the labor press. So as you can see, there were newspapers published by and for coal miners. These kinds of publications are great because they're serving a demographic rather than a geographic locality. And I actually have some, it's an aerospace publication that was published on the East Coast that features my father-in-law who is on the West Coast because it was industry specific. And then we get material types. So are we looking for something on microfilm? Are we looking for an original, meaning that piece of paper, or newly added online resource? And if you happen to have the catalog number, you can put that in as well. Less is more, in my opinion, when it comes to something like this. So you can kind of start big and then narrow it down. So once you have your selections, you can hit search. As an example, I've been back to work researching my second great-grandfather, James Jackson. He spent almost his entire adult life near Pocahontas, a city in Randolph County, Arkansas. So that's where I put in. And we're going to put in 1850 to 1880 because that's kind of the time period I'm working on right now. And I just want to see how many papers I've got to deal with. So I click on search and we discovered that there are only 5. They're presented by the default order of relevance, but you can change that to state, title, or date. Each result gives us the name of the paper, the place of publication, and the dates of publication. So remember I said that this was, it's by decade. So I only asked it to give me papers up through 1880, but since the Randolph Scalpel was published in 1870 and in 1880, it gives me all of it. So you're going to catch the ones that kind of bleed over into a decade that's not in the search criteria that you asked for. So all these are kind of interesting, but we'll see this one is most promising. So let's take a closer look. We click on it. This is the catalog entry. We can click up at the top where it says libraries that have it, or down at the bottom, view complete holdings information. I don't know why there's 2 different buttons. I don't know why they're called different things. They're going to take you to the same next page. And in this case, one of the libraries that has the Randolph Scalpel is the Duke University Library in Durham, North Carolina. Wait, North Carolina? Records travel. We learned that the library has the paper as an original, meaning this is the actual physical piece of paper. We learned the dates of publication that they hold. In this case, it's just the one issue published on the 4th of April, 1878. And then we also get the last time the catalog was updated, which in this case was 1993. Even if I lived within 20 minutes of the library, I would not want to make the jaunt over there just to discover that maybe they don't have it anymore. They might, but they might not. This newspaper has not been digitized and been put online, so we're going to have to figure out what to do next. This is easy. So how do we do that? What I do is I just copy paste the holding type, the name of the place, pop it into Google or your favorite search engine, and ta-da. And then on the sidebar, we get contact information, operating hours. There's a link, there's a little button you can click, go straight to their website. We'll come back to this in a moment. So you found a record collection of interest and you figured out where it is, but we're staying on our couch. How do we get into those records? How do we find out if it's really something that will be useful for us? Some historical societies and archives have posted information on their websites outlining how to order research. So always visit the website first, especially when you're on a roll, but it's 11 o'clock at night and they're closed. You might be able to email instead of calling. And as we saw with the Berkeley website, many libraries are using a service called Ask a Librarian, which is a live chat which connects you with somebody who's working at the library or within its network of libraries. They will be very familiar with their collections. They'll be able to tell you about the records they hold and how you might be able to access them if you need to do it long distance. For the few that aren't quite in the 21st century yet, there's always good old-fashioned pen and paper and writing to them. Now, I know that I don't have to say this to a group of genealogists, but it does really pay to be polite. In the majority of cases, the repository that you're contacting, they kind of have other priorities than helping us genealogists. I know, it seems like it's a crazy thought that they should want to, have other things to do, but sometimes that's the case, especially if you're dealing with a courthouse where they've got active business of the court to handle. So give them a little extra time and be patient waiting for your turn. Let's go back to Duke University. So they also have a handy Ask a Librarian feature. If we're doing our research while they're open, that's the first thing I do. But I'm not always doing research when the places are open. So you can kind of poke around the website. I promise you won't break it. But I noticed this on their homepage, the Library Service Center. Let's see what this is. And there's a little video and there's some information about what the LSC is. But there's also a request items button. So that tells me that I might be able to get some research help long distance. I can either go through those links or I can give them a phone call, and it gives me the hours as well. Now, every repository handles requests for research in their physical or offline collections a little differently. Some might do a specific search, such as an obituary with a known date of death, for free or a nominal fee, maybe just the cost of copies or postage. There are some places that charge significantly more. The New York Public Library charges $40 an hour and up for research. Some might require that you submit the request through their interlibrary loan system. The repository might ask that you contact the local genealogy society and ask them for help. And I've been a member of societies where that's kind of part of how they keep themselves running is they'll do lookup requests for a small donation. It takes the pressure off of the repository and taking care of those requests, and it helps out the local society. They might send you, let you know that, well, we can't help you directly and we don't know anybody local who can, so you're going to need to find somebody to come in or come visit us. We'd love to have you come visit us. Especially if you've got a more involved request than just a simple one item. If you're tracing a chunk of land over the course of 100 years, you're probably going to need to either come in or find somebody to help you. Every organization will have different rules and procedures to follow. And I'm going to mention something important. I mentioned nominal fees and sometimes more than that. You should generally go in expecting to pay for research time or at least copy fees when you're reaching out to these. Now, you might think that charging these fees is unreasonable. If you went in person, you could access the stuff for free. But I want you to keep in mind that in addition to being far less costly than traveling to these places, these fees rarely cover the true cost of preserving these records and then providing them to you. Even if they do start to cover that cost, whether they do or not, it helps support the repository's mission of preserving and providing access to the records. And it is expensive to do that. Just the electric bill alone can be pretty hefty. But what if the repository says they can't help you with your research even for a fee? They're too busy to handle it. Can you still get the information you want without having to travel? Of course you can. The Association of Professional Genealogists is designed to connect individuals who need research help from a professional genealogist or record pulled from a varying location by individuals who understand the type of information that we're looking for and what we might need. Now, I am a member of APG. I'm not on the board or anything like that, but I am a member of APG. And I have used APG to help me find people physically in locations where I need a record. So members of APG, we are genealogists as well. So we've got an idea of what you're looking for. If we're local and we're accepting clients, then we will be happy. We can work with you. And you can make that determination. If there's somebody local to where you need to be, you can hit the Find a Genealogist button down there, or you can go down to the big button on the main page. A few years back, the Federation of Genealogical Societies merged with the National Genealogical Society. Since then, the Genealogical Society directory was created, and we can access this for free. Even if you are not a member of NGS, you do not need to be a member of NGS to get into this. So click on Societies and Organizations, find a society, library, museum, archive, or college program, and that's going to open up this search box. Just recently, I needed records from Cooper County, Missouri. And while there's no society listed for that county, there are two in next door Boone County. So I reached out to them for help. Maybe one of their members in Boone County lives right over the border in Cooper and can go help me. Again, members of genealogical societies are genealogists and they know what we're looking for. Now, research might not be free from those societies, but again, if they are charging or requesting a donation for their time and effort, that helps them stay open, right? It helps them provide speakers, helps them maintain their collections if they have one, all that good stuff. All right. If you have lots of research, see if members can get a certain amount of help for free or at a reduced rate. I've come across a number of genealogy societies that members get 1 hour research free per year, or it's 20% off or something like that. So becoming a member might save you a little bit in the end. If your budget is especially tight, and boy, do I understand how that goes, you have options for getting the research you need. There are lots and lots of groups on social media, especially Facebook, such as there's a Random Acts of Kindness Genealogy Society or group where volunteers might be able to help you. There's also a couple of newspaper lookup ones. And I'm going to remind you, just in general, that our focus is on the offline stuff. Please keep in mind that asking for lookups from the big pay websites and these Facebook groups might be asking those subscribers to violate the terms and conditions of their subscription. Some Facebook groups just flat out in their rules do not allow you to ask for a lookup from a paid site just to protect everybody. Instead, if you need something from one of those paid sites like Ancestry or Full3, consider visiting your local public library, Family Search Center, or National Archives office if you've got one nearby. They have those subscriptions for you to use for free. Like your local library is going to vary by library by library, but the Family Search Centers and the National Archive offices have subscriptions that you can use. Take a flash drive so you can take home your research finds. You can also reach out to friends and members who live near the repository in question and ask them nicely for their help, even if they aren't genealogists, especially if you know specifically what you need. One of my aunts, who was not at the time interested in family history, lived in Salt Lake in the 1990s. Well, my grandmother was getting ready for the big family reunion, and she wrote to her daughter and said, could you go down to that big library and see if they have your grandfather's passenger list and naturalization records? Okay, my aunt said, all right, I can do that for you, Mom, no problem. And she went down to the library, and while she was there, she got bitten by the genealogy bug. So don't rule out your non-genealogist friends and family. You never know. You might end up with a new research buddy and your records. And since we've seen how records can travel, perhaps that friend or family member who also does genealogy has discovered that there are records that they need that are near you, and you can offer research and trade. Like, I'll go down to my courthouse. Could you swing by your library? There's a wealth of information out there about our ancestors, lurking in dusty basements, living in courthouse vaults, sitting forgotten on shelves, preserved on microfilm rolls, waiting for us or our agents to go discover it. And it's so, so easy to get overwhelmed with all of the information available to us already, and the billions and billions of records already digitized and searchable, especially now with new full text search where things are really searchable. But if we stop at what's online and easy to get into, we're going to miss out on important pieces of our ancestor stories. And worst of all, we might create a brick wall for ourselves that didn't need to exist because we started believing those myths we talked about at the beginning and wrote off the idea that a record might exist because it wasn't online. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I hope I've given you some new resources and ideas that will help you locate the offline records that do exist, but might not be online anytime soon. And with that, Olive, what questions do we have? Oh, so the fans are the friends, associates, and neighbors. Although a lot of folks include family in that. So sometimes it's, that extended family as well. Oh, the newsletter comes out once a week on Fridays. I chat at you about something going on in the world, genealogy wise or in my little world. And there's usually, research tips, and I play with This Week in History. So there's some informational stuff as well, and the occasional special offer. I try not to drown you in email. Once a week. Oh, so to get on the newsletter, you can, there's, if you have your phone handy, you can zap the QR code and it'll take you through, or just visit the website and a little pop-up little thing will pop up that says, would you like the newsletter, and get a worksheet, and you just fill that out. It's a quick opt-in form. I also have on Wednesdays, I send out a record set of the week. So I highlight some various and sundry record set that I have discovered. Usually not the big well-known stuff. I'm trying to find some interesting, like, oh, you've never heard of that? I never heard of it either. Have this fun thing that you can opt in on at the same time that comes out on Wednesdays. So if you do both, it's 2 emails a week. I try to keep the record set fairly short.
Okay, sweet. Well, if there's no more questions, we can go ahead and wrap up. I'm going to share my screen over yours. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you will join us for our next webinar on August 6th with James Tanner about researching your Native American ancestors. A recording of this webinar will be made available by next week. You can view that on our YouTube channel or on our website. If you have any comments or questions, you can always email us at fh_webinars@byu.edu or follow Facebook and Twitter. Thank you and have a wonderful week.